Hi, this is Paul from St. Louis, Missouri, and you're listening to Scandal Water.
Where the tea is hot and the conversation lively.
Your hosts, Candy
And Ashley
will discuss a peculiar story somehow related to the entertainment industry. This podcast might not change the world, but it just might satisfy your thirst for an intriguing tale.
Oh, it's that time of day. Tune in and hear what the ladies say. It's time to bend your ear when the silver screen appears. Stories about the stage and screen and everything in between. So come on and join the fun. The curtain opens in 3, 2, 1. Stories and scandal water, it's where you need to be. Stories and scandal water, let's pour you a cup of tea.
Good morning, Ashley.
Good morning, Candy.
So I don't know if you can hear it, but there are big smiles on our faces. And, we should mention that this is actually recorded. So if you would like to watch this, you have the option of going to YouTube and you can actually see the video because we are doing something very, very special today. Hence the smiles, hence the recording. If you've not yet heard part 1, last week's episode was the first of a 2-part feature on the movie Hoosiers. So you might want to pause now, go back and listen to part 1 if you've not yet heard it before you come into today's episode, because what we're doing today, very, very exciting. Thanks to listener suggestion from our friend and listener Merle, we reached out to Brad Long, who played Buddy Walker in the beloved hit Hoosiers, and he kindly agreed to speak with us. And we are now headed into an interview with Brad. Couldn't be any more excited. Here we go. We are delighted and honored to have with us today Mr. Brad Long, who played Buddy in the beloved sports classic movie Hoosiers. Thank you so much for being with us here today, Brad. We cannot thank you enough, and we are
No
so
problem.
excited.
Glad to be here.
Obviously, you know this, I'm sure. We have so many fans around us. A lot of our listeners are big fans. So before we even begin, we just want to let everyone know that we gave a few of our friends and listeners who we knew to be big Hoosiers fans the opportunities to ask a few questions or to offer a few comments that we would share with Brad. So expect those to be filtered in a little bit throughout this conversation that we're about to have. So we're going to start with one of those now.
Yeah. A dear friend of mine, Duke Lowe, was actually an extra in the film, and he had the following comment to share with you and to our listeners. He said, "Tell Buddy that one of the radio announcers, me, said hello and loved watching him in particular during the game scenes. The only story he has that stands out for him is while he was talking to Gene Hackman one day between shots, he had his game book rolled up in his hand, the one he always carried. And he said, is that really some plays mapped out in those pages? He says, no, it's my movie script."
Yeah, that could very well be the case. I know there's a lot of props, that they use to make the movie look realistic. To be honest with you, we didn't have a lot of set plays that kind of rolled the ball out and said, go at it. We did have a few staged particular scenes, but other than that, it was pretty organic. And I think that kind of added to the spontaneity, of the movie and the reactions of the fans and all that kind of things, that it wasn't that scripted.
Nice. I should give a shout out also, because the reason we are able to talk with you today, in addition to your kind agreeing to do it, one of our listeners, Merle, is the one who suggested that we do this topic. He also was an extra in Hoosiers, and he has heard you speak several times and had shared with us how wonderfully inspirational and articulate you were. And he suggested that we try to reach out to you. So thank you, Merle, for that wonderful suggestion. And with that said, I'm going to ask you, I'm sure the question that you've been asked many times before, how did you end up winning the role of Buddy?
It's a long story, but I'll make it short. I go back to 1985. I was the oldest player. I graduated from college in spring of 85. And there was articles in the newspapers saying they were looking for 18 to 20-year-olds to portray this Hickory High School basketball team, a story loosely based on the Milan team that won the state here in 1954. And, I felt like I was too old. I was 23, but back then I had hair. I looked young for my age. It's going the other way now. But I had a lot of my friends, say, hey, man, you ought to try out for that. You still play basketball, And so one thing led to another. They ended up interviewing, we heard later, over 8,000 young men. They went to LA, Chicago, and Indianapolis and narrowed it down to the 8. And I tell people that, most sports movies, they look for actors and hope they can play basketball or football, whatever the movie's about. This one, they took a different twist. They looked for basketball players and hoped they could act and didn't give us too many lines. And so to finish that story, then it kept getting narrowed down. And then finally it got down to basically about the final 16. And we went to a reading, and I remember going around the room and, I don't know what they saw in me. It may have been maybe that I was older, maybe a little bit more comfortable in front of the camera, being a little older. I don't know. Never really bothered me. Being in front of the camera, what I do for a living, I'm in front of kids in high school, speaking, to lots of kids. So you kind of get used to that. And then, the basketball ability, I was not a Division I player. I played at a small school in Kansas. Wasn't quick enough to play D1, but again, that was the charm of the movie. The Milan team was kind of just a group of fundamentally sound guys. They were good players on the team, don't get me wrong, but wasn't any 6'10" power studs. That's not who Milan was. So that helped me as well, because I kind of fit in that middler category.
That's cool. I like that. Enoch is another friend and listener, a big fan. He personally spent 16 years coaching, and he led one of his 2 teams to achieve the most wins in school history. He shared that part of the reason Hoosiers has always resonated so strongly with him is because he loved the Milan understory and the idea of a community supporting their kids on a common mission. Now, he has heard that the reason Buddy returns to the team without really any explanation is because the scene was cut. So he would like to know how Buddy did end up back on the team and how you feel about that explanatory scene being deleted.
Yes, it's one of the biggest questions I get, especially people that know me. They kind of look for, what I'm doing in the movie. You tend to, see what the people that focus in on them. And so it was a big scene that got cut. And in the scene, it's after I've been kicked off the team for mouthing off, but I come back in a barn where Coach Dale is sitting on a bale of hay reading a book. I drive up in a 52 Chevy. I get out of the car. I walk in with my leather jacket on, and my girlfriend is in the barn, Loetta. That really never comes out in the film either, but Loetta, the head cheerleader, was my girlfriend, and she's mad at me because I quit the team. And so she kind of gives me the what for, and then it's about a 5-minute dialogue with Coach Dale and myself, and that's my second chance. And he waves me off and says, second chance is the last one you'll get. And I get back in the car and I drive off. That scene gets cut from the final version. However, it is in the deleted scenes. If you get the DVD, there's about 13 scenes, and that scene made it in. And the director, David Anspall, told me that he really fought for that to stay in there. He thought it was a good scene, and it would channel that gap as to how Buddy got back on the team. But that's your explanation. And then you say, well, why did they cut it? The people at Orion Pictures felt like at that juncture in the movie, I looked a lot like Jimmy. They were afraid audiences would be confused. Was that Buddy or Jimmy that came back on the team? And really, we don't look that much alike. Maybe with the crew cuts, it's hard to pick us apart, but that's why it got cut. And all these years later, that's one of the questions I get from critics is, how did Buddy get back on the team? So if you ever really want to know, get that DVD that shows that deleted scene, then that will explain that.
The popularity of this film, has the director ever said, well, I want to release my director's cut of this and put it all back in and give the fans this super long, because wasn't it something like 2 hours, 47 minutes or 2:48, the original cut? I bet there would be a lot of people that would love to see it in the order that his original vision for it.
Yeah, I think there's thoughts around that. Don't hold your breath. Stranger things have happened. I've heard things, I think it would be cool to re-release it in the movie theaters for a young generation to see, with the crowds clapping, the smell of popcorn and all of those things that come with it, to make that theater experience, even more enjoyable. So we'll see what happens with that. You never know. And, you see movies that will re-release like a 25-year anniversary. I think The Godfather did something here last year with the 50th release of Godfather, and they put some scenes back in, I believe. So those things have been done, and you're right. I mean, I think you'd have another young generation to see it that maybe have never seen it before, and then maybe to recapture some of those scenes to explain some of those gaps.
I was going to say, it had to be so disappointing for that actress to have her scene cut from this movie that went on to become so incredibly famous? Because I'm assuming that was probably her only scene in the movie.
Well, that's a great observation. Laura Robling's her name. She's a really sweet girl, and we all get to know each other during the set. And she's still in the movie quite a bit, but she has some of her lines cut. And the boyfriend-girlfriend dynamic, that was the only other love interest in the movie. Puppy love. I give her a little peck before I get on the little kiss on the lips before I get on the team bus for the caravan. I walk her to class carrying her books. It was just kind of an innocent little thing that they threw in there for some romance besides the one with Gene and Barbara Hershey. She did have some scenes that were cut. And again, they said later, those were things that didn't particularly advance the story. They were just sidelight stories and might give a color, but those are the ones I think that you might see possibly in an unfinished cut if they ever did that. But yeah, she did have some things cut, bless her heart, and she's a great actress. She deserved to have more of herself in that.
Was there any other major scenes that were cut? Because we know it had to be cut down to about 2 hours. So was there any other major scenes that you wish could have stayed in?
Yes. The other one that really comes to mind for me is the harvest scene. We had to be on set in Danville, Indiana at a farm at 3:30 in the morning because we had to be there for a dawn shot as the sun was coming up. And the premise of that scene was very much like throughout the fabric of the movie, small towns, how they all helped each other out. And it was a harvest scene where we all got on the trucks and went out in the field and helped each other out. And beautiful scene. And then we came up for a country dinner, which was a really cool scene. Corn on the cob and all those things you would get maybe in the 50s when a town came together to have a meal. So that one really sticks out for me. And I believe that is in the deleted scenes. But that's one, it's selfish on my part to want the one of me back in there, only really for reasons of channeling that gap, because that is a question. How Buddy was so vocal in the kickout scene, and I take Whit with me, but he's not that vocal. His dad brings him back, and then all of a sudden I reappear 3 games later. So that's a gap that needs filled. But that harvest scene is just a beautiful scene. So that would be one I would vote for to put back in if they do that.
Do you remember, was it the sorghum? Because I remember watching it when he's helping Barbara Hershey with stripping the sorghum and making that took me back to my childhood because my grandparents grew sorghum, and I remember seeing that. So I knew immediately what they were doing. But what were you all harvesting?
Yeah, and since you bring that up, that scene with Barbara, that was I believe at her house. That's when she and Gene are kind of getting to know each other, and there's a little angst there because she didn't want Jimmy to play and all that, and they're getting to know each other. And I believe that was sorghum. They were putting those stalks in there to squeeze the juice out. And I remember as a kid having sorghum and butter on biscuits. I mean, it was great. It makes me hungry now as I think about it. But the scene that we did was in a farm field, and little things that you can pick out and be critical. In every film, there's always little mistakes. And because we filmed that in the fall, it had us going into the field, basically doing some things that you might do in the spring is the best way to explain it. So the farmers picked it out. They said, hey, that the timing of that is bad. So those are things you err on the side of maybe actuality at the expense of putting some really neat, pretty scenery and things like that in. So 2 different locations on that. Great question. That was in the field, and I think it was corn. We were knocking down stalks, if I remember right. In fact, Ollie, Wade Schenk, who played Ollie, had a machete and accidentally cut himself out there when we were filming, and he was so worried they were going to fire him because the director and writer didn't know he cut himself, and they had to get him stitched up and get him back. So that's the kind of stuff that I think about when I think about the movie, the hijinks and all the side stories that you get a bunch of young boys together, you're going to have some trouble.
Okay, well, I have a kind of funny random, speaking of hijinks, question for you. So I know in the film that Gene Hackman's character asked you to get so tight on one of those other basketball players that you can tell what kind of gum he's chewing, and you say dentine later, that he was chewing dentine. What gum was Buddy chewing in the film? That's what I wanted to know.
Yeah, that's a great question. Maybe it was method acting, but I was chewing a stick of dentine. So, and maybe it made me think of my line. But it's funny you mentioned that line. Gene took me aside and said my favorite line in the whole movie was the dentine line. He said that was his single favorite line. And people that know me, they pick that out and they say, they like it. And what makes that scene work, truthfully, is not anything to do with me. It's all to do with Gene, Coach Dale. it's the reaction he has. Like, I can't believe the kid took me that serious, to know what kind of gum. And so I get a lot of feedback on that line. And I always tell that story about Gene, but I'm a gum chewer in real life. My wife gets after me a lot. She says, you chew gum too much. It's kind of a habit. So I don't know if Angelo worked that into the script or what, but it fit my personality perfectly.
Nice. I like that.
Well, this all segues very nicely into our next question as well, because as I was researching, I loved it when I saw that the filmmakers were trying to create such a strong bond and this cohesive sense of unity among those of you that were playing the teammates, that they took very strategic steps, like putting you in a hotel room together. So I wanted to hear more about what did they do to try to make you guys gel with each other in that way.
Team chemistry is always very noticeable. Anybody that watches sports, you either have team chemistry or you don't. And they were kind of methodical there. They did put us in a hotel. We stayed there. It was like Hickory City. It was all the players. It was some of the other cast, some of the lighting people, the gaffers. We got to know them, developed a bond with all of those folks that were a big part of the movie, obviously. But you get 18 to 22-year-old boys in a hotel together. I mean, all the things that, I remember one time Ollie had a BB gun, shot a couple windows out. We got in trouble for that. We moved Steve Holler's car, who played Raid, to another location, so we thought it was stolen. These are the things that we did. I could write a book on that, but we did. We stayed together there. We roomed together. Everybody had a roommate. There were 8 players, so everybody had a roommate. And it was kind of like going back to college a little bit to some degree. And, we would spend a lot of time there, develop that bond with each other a lot. And then hopefully that transferred over to the movie when we would film together. There was chemistry. We got to know each other in a short period of time. And you sprinkle in the fact that we were all basketball players. There's a real fraternity with every sport. You got football players, there's always a fraternity within your sport. And I think that lent itself also to helping with that team chemistry. And we all played basketball. We all knew the game, and then we got to know each other on the court. Which way would he normally cut, or is he going to backdoor here? We got to know those things, and hopefully that showed up on the court.
Do you still talk to them? Are you still in contact?
Yeah, we are like, you two ladies can probably think of college and maybe college friends or roommates. You may not see them for a while, but when you see them, it's like you pick up right where you left off. Very much that type of relationship. And that's the way we are. We're always, it definitely is increments of 5 years. Every 5 years, they do some type of reunion or get together, or that's a given. And then you sprinkle in between all those things, there's other little side-like things. I'll give you an example. We were all together in Chicago back this last November for an autograph signing up in Chicago. I've learned a lot about autograph signing. I don't charge for autographs. I think that's silly. I'm honored if somebody wants me to sign a piece of paper. I'm flattered by it. And none of us players do. But what they do is they pay you a fee to appear. It's a big company that does it. So I don't feel bad about that. The company puts all that together. And so they pay us a flat fee. And point is, we went up together, signed autographs, got to see each other and catch up on old stories, spent the night in a hotel together, right back where we were like 38 years ago. And I got to meet Peyton Manning. That was a plus out of that. I'd never met Peyton living here in Indy my whole life. I'd always admired him. And I told him, he looked at each player, grabbed us by the shoulder and told us our character name and a line that we had from the movie.
Oh my
And
God.
I was so impressed by that. I already was impressed with his physical ability with what he did as a quarterback, but that mind, that told me a lot right there. The preparation, I don't know that I could do that. And I was in the movie. So walked away really impressed by that. And then one more Peyton story. I'm a Peyton guy, if you can't tell. I said, Peyton, when you were introduced to the Indy media, do you remember one of the first questions you were asked? And the question was, Peyton, what are you going to do with all that money? And I looked at Peyton, he looked at me, and I said it as he said it, and it was earn it. And he said, Brad, thanks for remembering that. He said, isn't that funny? Nowadays, you may not see the kids think of that. And I thought, what a cool answer.
Yeah.
Earn it. And boy, did he earn it. So that's my Peyton story.
I love that. Well, I wanted to ask a follow-up question. I don't know that I've ever seen this in the research that I've done. I'm curious to know, what did your overall schedule of activities look like as someone involved in this movie? Because I wouldn't have expected the hotel. I'm guessing there might have been training. What happened before you went into scenes? I would just kind of like to see the big picture of what it looked like for you.
Yeah, it's a good question. I always tell folks when I speak, I say, I'll give you a typical day in life during Hoosiers. And of course, we stayed at the hotel. First thing we would do is we would get up, depending on when our casting call was, might be 8 in the morning. We would go to our door, and on our door, it would tell us the scenes that were being shot, what time we need to be on set. We would have a shuttle bus that would take us depending on who was needed for scenes that day. I personally get a little gross here. Gross isn't the right word, but I was 23, so I had hair on my chest. I was a little older. They made me shave my chest. They felt like I looked, a little bit older. And so, my wife had always said what a pain it was to shave legs. We guys have to shave our face. And I'd always say, yeah, it can't be that bad. But I'm here to tell the guys it is no fun. They gave me a bottle of neat and a razor and said, go to it. So I basically had to shave my chest. That was part of my personal routine, probably once every 4 or 5 days, whatever. And then we would go to set. And then it was a lot of, honestly, everybody thinks movie making is really glamorous. It's a lot of hurry up and wait. There is a lot of setup time. They might take 4 hours to set up a scene that lasts 8 seconds. Ooh. It's really amazing how much downtime. So we're there a lot of times on one knee watching things getting set up or shooting baskets. We got to play a lot of basketball off set, which was great. We loved doing that. And that probably helped with maybe our scenes as well. It kept us in shape. But then we might film all day. Towards the end of the day, they would wrap. Sometimes it would be late, sometimes not. They would always feed us. They had a truck there, a caterer, kind of a food truck. If you think of food trucks nowadays, same thing. It was very good food. I mean, it was Unique Catering, I think was the name of them. I'll give them a plug. I don't know if they're still around. We would have our meals there on site, and then we come back to the hotel, and depending on how tired we were, go to bed and get ready for another day. That was pretty much life during filming.
Wow. So there wasn't really any set training in terms of we're going to put you guys together for a week and talk about how to play 1950s ball, or we're going to talk to you about how to act. It was just kind of day by day, you just did your thing.
We did do some acting improvisational classes with Gene Hackman before we started filming. We were in a room with Gene Hackman, just the players, the director and the writer, and Gene. You talk about captive audience. And we did just a lot of impromptu stuff. One thing I remember, we had to do what they called forced emotion. Very hard to do. I'm not really a crier per se, but we had to really project ourselves into something that might really make us sad and try to shed tears. That's one thing I remember. Stuff like that. We had to sing our favorite song in front of everybody. Mine was Take It Easy by the Eagles. So I was belting out Glenn Frey back then. But those are things they did to, I think, if for no other reason, kind of make you very vulnerable and strip you down to, you're going to be in front of a camera. There's no hiding. And so we're not going to hide now. We're going to sing in front of each other. We're going to cry. And I think about that. That's really the only training we did. I remember David Anspaugh telling us the art of acting is not acting. It's being yourself with a little bit more energy. I remember that's what Gene would tell us. You pick up the energy level a little bit. As far as basketball practicing, we didn't do a lot of that because we were all ball players. They didn't have to do much training there. We all had either played high school or college basketball. So that saved them time, I think, to, kind of go through fundamentals and things like that. As a general rule, we all could play. So that eliminated that training. But other than that, not really. I think that was maybe the formula. They didn't want seasoned actors in this thing. They really wanted kind of nobodies, that raw innocence, maybe, players not pampered or not too set in their ways, pretty raw. And hopefully that came through in the film. And then they were careful about not giving us too many lines, I think, because none of us were seasoned actors. But that was really the training.
Just an editorial comment, I can't help saying, I've heard so many different reviewers talk about, in addition to obviously, the underdog, sense of the story, that one of the greatest strengths is the relationships, the development of the characters and the relationships and how much you care about their relationships with each other, which I think speaks to what you were just saying, having you guys form that bond that was so evident to everyone. And I think it's also then a compliment that they could cut all of those relationship building scenes from the movie and still it hangs together the way it does. So
yeah, I appreciate that. That's a compliment, I think, to the writer and director. It's the old axiom, people don't care how much you know, but they know how much you care. And I think there was a lot of caring in this film. They really they realize, I think David and Angelo both, this is our one shot. This is how we're going to probably be judged. Will we ever be able to go back in the state of Indiana again after this film? I remember those guys saying that. And I'm sure at the time they had no idea. I know that Gene Hackman didn't think it was going to make it. I know I've heard some stories where he said, well, it was a learning experience, fellas, great job. Maybe the next we'll get better each time we go. That was kind of his speech to the writer and director. And I've heard to this day, he has come back and said, I don't know how you guys did it, but you did. And Gene Hackman, incidentally, here's a guy who played Lex Luthor in Superman. He did Popeye Doyle in French Connection. The number one thing he gets asked about whenever he's interviewed? Hoosiers.
Really?
Yeah, Coach Dale. And I'm sure he's just not baffled by that, but I don't think he would ever have predicted that.
Following up with that, Gene Hackman, David Anspaugh has been quoted as saying, Gene had me on the verge of a nervous breakdown. He gave me my first anxiety attack. I thought every day on the film was going to be my last because Gene's agent was trying to get me fired. But we've also heard stories about Gene offering acting tips to those of you all playing the players and joking with you. So tell us a little bit more about what your perspective was to work with him. What's the difference between truth and your version of working with him?
Yeah, I can speak to both those. Let's start with David. He did give David a hard time. He felt like that the movie should not have been that much footage of the players and the games. He thought it should be more on him and Dennis and the relationships between him and Barbara. I'm sure in his shoes, you might think that. You're thinking this is not an egotistical way, but, people know Gene Hackman. They know Barbara Hershey. They know Dennis Hopper. They don't know these guys. Will that draw people to watch the movie? But I have heard he had told David and Angelo after the success of it, you were right. It should have been. So let's start with that. So Gene did think that there was angst between him and David on the set. And I give David Anspaugh a lot of credit and Angelo Pizzo both. They stood up to Gene. They were very respectful. I know one time they got into it in the middle of the floor. I'll never forget it. And I remember David saying, with all due respect, Gene, I disagree. And they got through it and we got through it. And here we are today. As far as, I'll tell you another Gene story. He was interviewed by Entertainment Tonight, John Tesh and Mary Hart. And I remember he said something that's always stuck with me. He said, only in Indiana could you get 8,000 people to cheer for a fake basketball game. Mm-hmm. And I love that line. And I think that's so true. That's a compliment. I think that's a compliment, But yeah, that's kind of my take on Gene. And then you mentioned the players, our relationship with Gene. It was a friendly relationship. He was very helpful. One example you mentioned, did he coach us up as far as the acting part? I'll give you a specific instance. He, in my kick out scene where I get kicked out of practice for mouthing off, he took me aside and said, I think you would be angry here. You should play this a little bit more angry because I just kicked your dad out. That never comes out in the script, but George, who is the interim coach before Gene walks in, that's my father in the film. And so Gene kicks him out, and then I mouth off after that, and that makes sense. Gene was right. I would have been angry, and that's why I act so awful. That was my character, a cocky, kind of a team captain type. And my teammates from college and high school, they'd say, man, Long, we don't remember you talking back to a coach like that. And that's what made it fun, to get to kind of be out of my skin, out of my element, and do something I'd never done before. But that is the story there on that. Gene would give us little tips like that. And I took that. If you go back and watch that scene, I'm kind of a smart ass in that. I act awful. And that partly is because Gene said, yeah, you'd be angry here. I even smacked the door on my way out. That was improvised. I did that on my own. Nice. And they came up after me, the writer, director, and Gene said that was great. And so, I'll never forget, that was just a little compliment I got from them. I just thought of that. I thought, if I'm mad, I'm mad. So I smacked the door on the way out. So little tidbit there.
That had to be very affirming to be this brand new actor around all these stars and have them to tell you did that so well.
Yeah, it's, and in the scene that gets cut, where I walk into the barn, had that dialogue with Coach Dale. They do safeties. You do a take, and then you might do 2 or 3. We didn't do too many takes because we were all basketball players. It didn't take very long to make a shot or make a play, where if you had non-players, it might take 6, 7 takes. Same thing on the other scenes. They wanted to be more organic and more not too thought out. And on the scene where I asked to be back on the team, I'm out concentrating on my lines. I think we're getting ready to do a second take. And somebody grabbed me from behind, spun me around, and it was Gene. He said, Brad, that was great. And so Another little thing that I'll never forget, an affirmation from Gene Hackman. You don't get any better than that. And that's not about me. It's about him, really. It's about, maybe what he's like offset, what he does to help his actors. In the basketball circles, we say the great players are the ones that make others around them great. And I think of great players, that's exactly what happened. That's kind of what Gene did as an actor.
Oh, nice. What a nice tribute.
So that actually answered a question that our friend Jeff had. He and his wife Carrie run some businesses up in Indiana, so they're close to you, and he wanted to know some accounts of Gene Hackman on the set. So thank you for answering that for him.
Yeah, no problem. I do have to probably add one more Gene story,
Absolutely.
because oftentimes I will get asked, what's your favorite scene in the movie? And as much as I like the hospital scene, and I love that scene, it's an emotional scene. I'm not even in it, so shows you my heart. I just think that's a cool scene. But I think the scene that encapsulates the whole movie is basically a single line from Coach Dale when he walks out into the Hickory gym for the first time. It's his first game, and he pauses, adjusts his tie, and he says, "Welcome to Indiana basketball." And then he walks out. That line, to me, kind of encapsulates the whole movie. Here's his introduction in Indiana basketball, which it is different. I'm a little biased, but Indiana basketball, we're a crazy basketball state. And the fact that it is sort of forecasting what's to come. What does that mean? What all comes with that Indiana basketball? And we saw later what happened with him, the townspeople. So I have to get that in, because that's probably my single favorite line in the movie. And I think it encapsulates the whole movie.
There's a few lines that I liked. One of them that I thought was really sharp, and I really liked the way they wrote Gene's character, where he was a man of principle, and he was like, here's the way it's going to be. And I may get it wrong, but I think he says something like, I would hope he would support who we are, not who we were.
Yes.
And I thought, wow, that's a really great way to say, this is your team. This is them.
Yeah.
This is
that's a great observation. That's another really great line. And really, Angelo was the writer. He came up with lots of little lines like that. I mean, I get asked a lot about let's move it, Gizzard. When I get kicked out and I take Wit with me and I yell back on him, let's move it, Gizzard.
Yeah.
That was a period thing. That was like a slang term for someone that you're trying to diss. It was like an insult when you called someone a gizzard, because I think it's like a turkey gizzard, chicken gizzard. I asked Angelo about it, and he said that was kind of a period thing. That was something you would call someone if you were upset with them. So I get asked about the gizzard line a lot too. I think it's funny.
I also liked how respectful they were of the one kid that prayed, and they didn't make him stop his praying. They let him pray. But I thought it was funny when his character says, God wants you out on the court there. Let's go. And then he says,
I'm biased about that because I'm a Christian. I do a lot of speaking to youth groups. So, and I get asked about that periodically from Christian friends or observers. They say, how did you feel Christianity was portrayed in the film? Do you feel like they mocked it? Did they make fun of it? I said, no, not at all. I think it showed the small town values, the fact that we prayed before the games, the fact that we had a boy that I think it's pretty cool. And I'm proud in the work, because I know we're not supposed to be proud, but I'm happy with how the Christian influence was portrayed in the film.
I thought it was very respectful. I liked it too. And it just was this is who this kid was. They respected it. They
Right.
just let him be who he was. I really liked that.
Well, since we've been talking about Gene, let's go ahead and talk about some of the other big name actors. There's actually also been a lot of talk about the fact that Barbara Hershey did not have the best experience on the film. I've heard David, Angelo, and actually the actor who plays Everett all comment that she seemed unhappy. Dave, I think it was actually Angelo, noted that she wouldn't do any publicity. And basically, I heard that she thought her role would be much more significant and was disappointed that it was more about the basketball and the players than about her romance with Gene. But I wanted to get your perspective. What was it like working with Barbara, and what would you say regarding these stories?
Yeah, I may be a fly in the ointment, but Barbara was very nice to me. I never had any issues with her. I invited her home for Thanksgiving. She came really close to coming. She ended up going back to LA with her daughter at the last minute, but she was very nice to me. I know what you're talking about. There was talk about that. I think in defense of her, I think she felt like she was not going to be portrayed as kind of this school marmy, type character, and it was going to be more about the relationship and the dialogue. But at the end of the day, and with all due respect, I love Barbara. That's what her character was. I mean, she was kind of and so I think, I don't want to speak for her, but I think all these years later, she might think, that really was what I was casted for. And she might have even been thinking more along the lines that Gene thought early on, that it should be more about focusing on the big names and their dialogue and their relationships rather than all the basketball. Mm-hmm. But as in retrospect, we can look back now and say that really all that basketball seemed to work, Yeah. And Gene has not resigned himself, but admitted, big man, I think, really to do this, said, I was wrong on that. These guys got it right. And mm-hmm. I feel like in my heart that Barbara would feel that way. But I never had any issues with it. She was very nice to me. And, but I did hear that, and it'd be interesting someday. I may just surprise her and try to get a hold of her and just ask her what the deal was. I don't know whether she'd take my call, but I don't know if she has changed that tune all these years later or not. But I thought she did a great job in it. Let me say that too. The character that she played was great. It was perfect. I mean, the only thing that we kind of laugh about, the players, and I know David and Angela won't care if I say this, we felt like he was a little bit too old for her. Even as young, 17, 18, 20-year-old guys, we thought, he's robbing the cradle here, with Barbara. But so we laugh about that now. But, in most movies, they have to have some type of a romance because they want to draw in all types of people in the crowd so they'll be interested. The movie is certainly about basketball. It's based on a true story. Obviously, it's about basketball. But when people ask me what it's about, I say it's about redemption. It's about second chances. That theme runs throughout the movie. And it's based on a true story. And the reason I think it was successful, number one, David and Angelo, they're the main reasons. But I think anytime you make a movie where underdog overachieves or something happens good at the end that you didn't expect, it makes people feel good about themselves and think, I can achieve this. I'm in this rut. If they did it, I can do it. And so I think that formula is always a good formula. And especially if you throw in the fact that it actually happened. It's a true story, that adds to it. So that's kind of my take on that.
Love it. And of course, we have to ask you about Dennis Hopper. What was it like working with Dennis?
Great. I miss Dennis. We lost him. Gosh, it's maybe been 15 years ago now. It was so cool working with Dennis. Cool is probably the best word. It fits him best because, that's Easy Rider. As a kid growing up, I remember Easy Rider. And one thing he told us, very transparent, he said, he looked at me one time and said, Brad, I basically missed the 1970s. I was on drugs, I was drinking, I was doing this and that. He doesn't remember a lot about the 70s. And at the end of it, he filmed Apocalypse Now, and he told us some Marlon Brando stories. And he remembers some about that, but not a lot. So anyway, the point of that is he kicked a lot of those habits and ended up, talk about second chance. That was a life second chance. And, talked about the evils of drugs and all those things. And not that, he regretted anything he had done because that made him who he was. But he reinvented himself. That shooter role, he would tell the press, this is a role that I practiced my whole life. I know what it means to be an alcoholic. And so Dennis was such a cool guy to know. And he told us James Dean stories. He and James Dean were in a couple of movies together, Giant and Rebel Without a Cause and Natalie Wood. I mean, it was like we were just in awe of Dennis. We played cards with him on set. He was just like a little boy in a man's body. He would shoot. One time we knocked over a camera one day. We all got in trouble, including Dennis. So we figured if we're okay if he got in trouble. We're not going to get too much trouble. But yeah, great guy. Yeah, I miss Dennis. Yeah.
Our friend Enoch, he also specifically wanted to know if you kids were aware of Sheb Wooley's musical career. At the time, did you know he had sung The Purple People Eater? And Candy didn't know this, and I didn't know this until I looked it up, but he's the originator of the Wilhelm scream that is used in films. Did you all know that when you were?
So at the time, I did not know it, but it's so funny that you brought that up. So he would play guitar on the set, and I knew Sheb was in High Noon with Gary Cooper. Yeah. That much I knew. That's a classic movie. I knew that going into the film. At 23, I knew a little bit about movies and things like that. I didn't know about Flying Purple People Eaters, but we caught him playing guitar on set and he was humming it. And I said, I know that song. And then he very humbly said, well, that's an old song of mine. That's how he told me. It's an old song of mine. It was number one in 1957. Oh. And so the reason I'm telling you this story, and it's interesting you asked that question, all these years later, my grandkids now are 7 and 4, granddaughter Avery and my grandson Ramsey, and they will come over and I YouTube videos for them, and we watch flying purple people eaters. It's done in a cartoon form. You got to watch it. You Google it, watch it.
Nice.
And it is, they go crazy. They go around humming the song. So, and we lost Sheb here a few years ago as well. I would love to have told Sheb that story, so I'm telling you in heaven, Sheb, that my grandkids are watching you sing that song.
So another friend and fan who sent in a question is TJ, and his comment is, I graduated with a total of 26 kids in my class, including only 9 boys. Most kids dream of playing in Rupp Arena in the state championship. I dreamed of coaching it and giving and David put his hand in the bag and pulled out a stone speech. TJ would like to know how receptive the townspeople were to the finished movie.
We're actually having a big celebration for them coming up in March. It will be the 70th anniversary of the Milan Miracle, they still call it, that happened in 1954. They're going to have a big round table discussion. They're expecting 3,000 people to come to the gym. Yeah, you guys ought to come. It's going to be a big event. But the townspeople of Milan, so I get that question a lot. Why was it called Hickory? Why was it not Milan? Why, was there really a town drunk in Milan? And here's the answer to that. You have to pay copyright money. Anytime you use actual names, actual towns, actual people, that's costly. You got to pay copyright money. And this was a low budget film. They just didn't have the budget that Terminator and Arnold had, back in the day. And so they changed the names. It's loosely based on the Milan story. There was a Jimmy Chitwood. Bobby Plump is the guy that hit the shot. That was pretty much recreated as is. There was angst and drama in the town. They had fired the coach of Milan the year before. New coach comes in and they went to the Final Four 2 years in a row. The second year they won the state. So there's that drama. Hopefully that answers your question. That's why it's not Milan. That's why it's not the Milan Indians. That's why all the team, it wasn't Bobby Plump. It was Jimmy Chitwood. That saved them money. Yeah. And the Milan folks understood that. I think there was a little maybe hurt feelings early on about that. But once it was explained, they understood that really one of the only ways to make that movie was to do it the way they did it, to not put themselves on the hole having to pay out all that copyright money. Yeah. And the Milan guys and the team and everybody in the town has endeared themselves with the movie. It's like a marriage now. We have events all the time with the players. The Hickory players are with the Milan guys all the time. And I can't say enough about those Milan guys. They're the nicest guys you ever want to meet. They're in their mid 80s, by the way. Wow. So yeah, that's how long ago it's been. So that's kind of the Milan background on that.
I got to watch a 4-minute clip of Bobby Plump talking about his experience and sharing some different reflections, and he seemed like the sweetest thing ever.
Nicest guy in the world. The old axiom that nice guys finish last does not apply here. These are the nicest guys in the world, give you their shirt off their back. They always come up to us at events and thank us. And I always have to stop them. I say, no, wait a minute. We are thanking you. We would not be here if it wasn't for what you guys did. I have to remind them of that. That's just how they are. They're very humble. I mean, to a gentleman, all of them, and their wives, and even the cheerleaders, some of the ones that are still living, just a really neat group. And they actually have a museum in the town of Milan based on that event. They get lots and I'm on the board, actually. I'm honored and humbled. They asked me to be on the board, so I know a lot about that. I'm really connected with the Milan Museum. I'm connected with the Hoosier Gym, which is where we filmed all of our. They've made that into a mini museum and have found their niche up there. They get 70,000 visitors a year. I couldn't tell you how many the Milan Museum gets, but I know it's from countries all over. So it's amazing how an event in 1954 still has the impact today that it does.
Yeah, that's so impressive. And it's just so beautiful that your movie then helps. You're part of the reason why people still remember and commemorate the miraculous thing they did. So it's just beautiful the way it kind of weaves together.
Yeah, they perpetuate really each other. It's amazing what they did, and Bobby always tells me that, you guys have extended our story. We just happen to, get to play the characters. I really give the credit to the writer and director. I really have to start with them. David Anspall, the director, and Angelo Pizzo, the writer. Those two guys are why Hoosiers is where it is. And there's a lot of other support people. Don't get me wrong. There's producers, there's lighting. I mean, it takes a village, obviously. There's a lot of people involved with that. But without those two, there's no Hoosiers.
So based on what you said earlier, you said it was just kind of seamless the way that you came together because you all had a background with basketball. Was it challenging at all to adjust to the 50s style of basketball? Because I've heard so many people say they appreciated the authenticity, that one of the things they loved about a sports movie was being able to tell you guys were actual athletes playing the game the way that they would have played it. So
yeah, that's a really great observation. We did have to, what I would say, tone our game down a little bit. What do I mean by that? None of us were Division I studs. We were all fundamentally sound. Couple of us played college basketball. So the fundamentals were there. We had to be careful about going behind our back, between our legs. That really wasn't a style during the 50s. It was much more fundamentally sound. Gosh, I've seen old clips of Bob Cousy. This amazes me, but if you watch Bob Cousy, this is way before my time, he didn't even really dribble with his left hand. He would dribble with his right, going to his left. And Bob was a great player. He's a Hall of Famer. That shows you the style at that time period. You know, nowadays that might get stolen pretty easily with good defense. Of course, we got crew cuts to fit the authenticity part of that. I got our hair cut back when I had hair. We wore the old satin shorts with the belts. Those were the uniforms of the time period. They made us listen to Glenn Miller music, big band music, to kind of put us in the mood. You know, that's one of the songs. That's one of the big songs by Glenn. So those are things they did to kind of create that authenticity. They wanted to make it very period, that it was kind of that time period. And that's probably one of the biggest compliments I think we get, is most players will say, you look like you were in that style. So we had to kind of work at that a little bit. Steve Holler comes to mind, who played Raid. He shot a set shot. He didn't shoot a set shot when he played at Warsaw. For this movie, he learned to kind of shoot a set shot, which was a popular shot. I always admired that he chose to do that, made it authentic. So yeah, we did. We had to learn how to play a little bit of 50s style of basketball,
Love it. Well, moving on to the themes or the messages of the movie, you've already said how important you think David and Angelo were in making Hoosiers what it was. Why else do you think this film has been so enduring?
Yeah, I mean, the quick answer is just that, based on a true story, non-actors to some degree, in a weird way, the fact that they used kind of nobodies that didn't have a lot of acting experience in kind of a weird way, I think lent a little bit to the charm of it. You have to have some seasoned actors in there, and they got Gene, they got Dennis, they got Barbara, got Sheb to flow along with dialogue and things like that. But I think to some degree they err on the side of authenticity more than polished acting. I think that's one of the reasons it has stayed the course all these years. ESPN stations like that keep helping us out because they keep doing polls. What's your favorite sports movie? That has helped us out. And there's a lot of great sports movies out there. Remember the Titans, Chariots of Fire. I can go down the list. Brian's Song. I have a lot of great sports movies that I really enjoy. So it's flattered just to be mentioned, with those groups. But I think that in the other way I would answer that question is that it's not just about basketball. It's about redemption and second chances. And that you can take a poll of 50 people and probably find different answers on why they like the movie. Some it might be the redemption part. Some it might be the scenery. Some it might be their basketball fans. So it kind of covers different aspects of the human, condition. Other than that, I don't know. I don't know what it is. I just know it's flattering, and we're honored that they still want to talk about it all these years later. It's kind of mind-blowing, really. You wonder if 50 years from now, will it be a movie that they still talk about? Who knows? You don't know. But that's one of the reasons I think they're trying to maybe get it in the theaters again for a young generation to see it, right, how they've never seen it before.
I was just sitting here thinking, one of the things that I like about it is the focus on teamwork. And instead of being jealous of Jimmy and his talent, all the team at that very last minute, when he gives them a play, he's like, everyone's going to expect Jimmy to do the winning shot, and we're not going to do that. And the team just looks at him, and Jimmy says, I can make the shot. And the team wants him. They want him to be the winner. And in a reversal of usual, he lets the team make the call. Because before, he was kicking kids out. He was saying, here's what I think we should do. And he'd like, get out of the game. You're not going to play. But they all became a team. Not only the boys on the team, but the coach became a team with them too.
That's a really good observation. I'd like to think, and I'm an old soul. I mean, I'm 61 now, and I remember in my day, there's things that in my day that happened that I don't see happening today. For instance, there's this term called load management where players rest, and there's just things that are happening nowadays that we really didn't have, and it's hard to relate to. NIL, transfer portal, all those things. Those are all different things. I'm not knocking them. I'm not saying it's wrong. I try to see both. I'm a salesman. I try to see both sides of the story. But that kind of piggybacks on your comment about the no jealousy, no dissension, nobody really caring who's the star. And that's not always the case nowadays. They're free agency, and I get it. You have to make a living. But the loyalty to your team and how you best can help them, your role. I think sometimes that's not always the case, and that's why those teams that don't have non-jealousy, that have the chemistry, that don't really care who the star is, those are the ones that tend to do better. Those are the ones that tend to rise to the top because of that. So that's really an interesting observation. You say, yeah, I think that might have been woven into the fabric of that too. That wasn't any side stories about team jealousy or things like that. We really just cared about the team and not individually. And basketball is a team sport. No matter what people think nowadays, you got a lot of great players. I love watching them play too. But to me, I love watching the best teams more so even than the best players. I'd rather watch a team that all works together than maybe a team that has the best player. I watch both, but that would be my druthers.
The movie Hoosiers has continued to be an important part of your life in other ways, because for many years now, you have been a very successful motivational speaker who has shared with audiences some of the behind the scenes stories and also life lessons that you can derive from the film. Could you share a little bit more with us about that?
Yeah, thanks for asking. I've been very fortunate. It started right after we finished filming Hoosiers, and my father-in-law asked if I would go speak to his Rotary group in town. That's where it started. Mm-hmm. And I hadn't thought much about it. And in my mind, I thought, well, who wants to hear about the movie? They can see the movie. But I started really talking about the behind the scenes things, things that happen that you wouldn't see on the screen, kind of the side stories. And then I'm a man of faith. I talk to a lot of folks in churches about my faith as well, but also would weave in life lessons in the movie that you see in life. Second chances is a life lesson. Learning to get along with others, learning that life isn't fair. You saw some of the players. The sooner kids, I can say kids now, I'm old, but the sooner that kids learn that, I think the better. That things. It's strength through adversity. Sometimes those things that don't go your way help you. Rejection, learn how to handle rejection. You're going to get that in sports. So a lot of things in sports and in the movie, I think you can translate to life. And so that's kind of the message I give. I've talked as little as 10 minutes and as long as an hour and a half, depending on the venue and what they want from me. I always take time for questions. I bring visual aids. I bring the jacket, the butch wax that we put on our hair, the old Converse tennis shoes, the script. I bring things like that for them to look at. Each talk, it becomes kind of a life of its own, but it depends on the audience, what they want from me. But yeah, it's been a blessing to be able to do that. It's been an opportunity for me to kind of give back a little bit. I was blessed to have that chance. And so people that, are interested in it, want to hear about it, I'd be glad to talk to them about it. And I continue to do that. If I had to give you a number, I'd say I probably since 1986 have had over 400 or 500 speaking engagements at different places. I got to speak to the Billy Graham Crusade in Marshall, Illinois, years ago to about 9,000 people. That was nerve-wracking. But and then I'll have a youth group of 8 kids, so different venues. And if they are interested enough to hear an old man talk about basketball and the movie and redemption and my faith, I'm willing to come talk.
Nice. I had a very different question I wanted to ask you. I was not aware of Kent Poole's tragic passing, and I ran across a short film your son Landry had created about it. Was honoring Kent, and it was sharing his struggle with depression, and it was very moving to me. So I wanted to ask you a little bit about that.
Well, thank you. I put in a plug for my son Landry. He's out in California doing his thing. You may hear his name one day. It's a dad talking, but he does lots of things, and he did that as a junior in high school. He did that piece. Yeah. And we called Judy, Kent's widow, and asked her permission, and Judy said it's time. And so tell you a little bit about Kent. Kent was my roommate. He played Merle, great guy, salt of the earth farmer. He fit the Hickory Husker character perfectly. If I had to give you probably the most typecast Hoosier basketball player growing up in Indiana, it would have been Kent. grew up on a farm, small family, small town, everything about it. And cut to the chase with Kent, he got to a point in his life in his mid-30s. He was a guy, I always tell people, that was kind of like King Midas. Everything he touched turned to gold. He didn't have a lot of adversity in his life. His marriage was great. His kids were wonderful. Good business. Everybody knew him. All the things that come with it. And then he started having some things in his life that, as Judy told me, his widow he put him into a dark place. And he had some business problems. The marriage had some issues. And it was as if he didn't know how to handle adversity. And Judy was the one that told me that, said he just didn't know how to handle it. And so, and in retrospect, all of us players talk about it when we talk about it, that coulda, shoulda, woulda. I mean, if we would have known. And he called me 2 weeks before he took his life. And I remember it was just like old college roommates catching up, talking. But I noticed he was a little bit quick with me, he which was abnormal for him. He was kind of wanting to get off the phone. And I remember saying, "Is everything okay?" And he said, "Oh, yeah." I said, "Just, I got some things going on." Said, "I'll talk to you about it later." And that has haunted me. And so then I got a call from my minister telling me that he had taken his life. And I'm still to this day just so sad about it. And I just cling to that. My minister told me that really when people do that, they are not really in their right mind. They become someone else. And so that's been a struggle for me with, the precious gift of life that we're given. And so my faith, I'm going to cling to that. Kent just was not himself when he did that. But that's the Kent story. And so Landry did that piece on him, and I thought it was very tastefully done. The family agreed to it, and it's kind of a tribute piece to him. And it happened to be my son that did it, and I was Kent's roommate. So it was kind of a God thing, the way the whole thing worked out. But thanks for mentioning that. And I miss Kent all these years later. I still miss him every day. But yeah, that was a sad event. That's one of our brothers.
As we wrap up, are there any words of wisdom that you would like to leave with our listeners? Any way that they could follow you? Any way that they could hire you if they would like you to come speak for them? So just give us your parting words.
Well, I appreciate that. Yeah, I have a website. It's bradlonghoosiers.com. Pretty simple. It took a genius to figure that one up. Nobody had it, so I used it, bradlonghoosiers.com. But you can go on that website, and it kind of tells, what I do for speaking engagement. It has a couple clips. I happen to be fortunate to be on the Dan Patrick Show. There's a clip from that. And so those pieces kind of give you a background on what I do. And so they're welcome to view that. The only thing I would say is it's just a blessing to be able to do things like this. And I thank you for giving me the time. It's, as I get older, it's amazing. I'll be having lunch somewhere. You'll like this one. And somebody will come up and tap me on the shoulder, and they'll say, "Excuse me, sir, was your son in Hoosiers?" So think about that for a minute. So that's what age does to you. I guess I have the mannerisms of Buddy, but I'm a little bit older version of Buddy now. So I usually see, "Yeah, that was my boy," and I finish my salad. No, I don't. I tell him the truth, and we have a conversation. But it's just amazing all these years later. We just feel blessed that this thing still resonates. And again, it's certainly about basketball. It's based on a true story, but it's about second chances. And so really, if I leave you with anything, it's just that don't ever give up. It's the Jim Valvano speech. I mean, there's always a chance to redeem yourself. Everybody has problems. My minister used to say there's pain in every pew. And that's true. Everybody has problems. Nobody is immune from it, and it's how you handle it. It's what you do about it. And in my case, faith is a big way I get through things. So yeah, that's how I leave it.
Oh my goodness. What a lovely inspirational way to end this interview when we've been talking about such an inspirational movie. So thank you so much for speaking with us. This has been delightful. It has been so fun. I know our listeners are just going to love this. So many thanks.
Well, thank you, ladies, and good luck on your show. And if you need anything from me, let me know.
Thank
you so much.
Take care.
Oh my goodness, Ashley, wasn't that wonderful?
Really, really was.
Yeah. So, okay, what are a few of your thoughts after speaking to Brad?
Okay, so one thing that I was grateful for is the way that he sort of cleared the air about Gene Hackman's feelings and Barbara Hershey's feelings. And, we've heard all of these rumors about how they were unhappy and cranky about the filming. But when he explained it, it makes a lot of sense, and it puts you in their frame of mind and what they were thinking. And I also liked hearing that Gene, at least, was really big enough to say, "Hey, you guys were right, and I was really wrong about this." And I just liked that. I liked that sort of clearing the air about it.
Yes, I definitely think the stories that it's swirled around both of those two very famous actors, he cast them in a different light for me.
Yeah.
Because I could understand maybe there was frustration there, maybe there was worry there, but they both seemed to, I mean, Barbara, he said, was delightful to him.
Yeah.
And it sounds like they both did come to realize that the movie was just different than what they thought they'd signed up for, I think.
Right.
Yeah. So that was nice. I think another thing I really appreciated was I love when things line up. Hoosiers is such an uplifting, wonderful, heartwarming underdog story. And I felt so positive the whole time I was talking to Brad. He is just the most positive. You could tell he's just the most kind-hearted person. And to think, here's this actor in this movie. I didn't know quite what to expect. And it was just lovely to hear him talk about all of the lessons they learned, all of the great relationships they formed, so many things that I enjoyed hearing.
They really were a team. They really were a team putting this together. And I loved meeting him. I love that our job allows us to meet these wonderful, inspirational people.
I know. We are very fortunate. And so, you know what? Let's stop there and let's just say a huge thank you to Mr. Brad Long. We could not be any more delighted to have had this chance to hear from you and to talk with you. Cheers.
Cheers.
If you love what we do, please rate and review our show. Or you can become a supporter by making a donation through buymeacoffee.com/scandalwaterpod. Whether a single gift or a recurring monthly donation, it would go a long way towards supporting our work and allowing us to keep the tea brewing.
At our website, www.scandalwaterpodcast.com, you can submit questions or your own story ideas, access our sources and show notes, see the merch we offer for sale, and more. You can join the Scandal Water community through our Scandal Water Podcast Facebook page or follow us on Instagram or TikTok at Scandal Water Podcast.
This episode was executive produced by Candy Thomas, that's me, and Ashley Raymer Brown.
That's me.
It was researched and written by Candy Thomas and edited by Ashley Raymer Brown.
A special thank you to Josh Martin, who wrote, composed, and performed the Scandal Water theme and other music. Matt C. Adams, who created the artwork, and Joshua Reith, who designed our website and provides ongoing technical support.
As a reminder, this podcast is purely for entertainment purposes. The thoughts and opinions of the host during each episode of Scandal Water are their own and do not reflect the opinions of any future guests, advertisers, or clearly professional psychologists. Thanks for listening.